Welcome to the Property Podcast, episode 185. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm here to bring some balance to the property investing world.
Well, hang on, what's all this? We've got an interloper, episode 185, and we are under attack from the Meaningful Money podcast. Rob, we've got an intruder in the house.
I know, that's my favourite bit. And he's taken it off me, I can't believe it. Well, as we've probably given away already, we're being joined by a very special guest, Pete Matthew from Meaningful Money. We'll come to his part of the show very, very soon. But we've got a few bits and pieces to make you aware of. First of all, Rob, Discovery Day that we mentioned for RMP Yellow. Not going to talk about that much because it literally sold out straight away. So 200 places gone, money going to charity, which is great. And finally, some people learning a bit about what we do. Because interestingly, when we surveyed our Property Hub audience, over 40% of people actually weren't aware of the things we did outside the podcast, which is incredible, really, because we feel like we talk about it all the time, but obviously a lot of people still don't know. So those days should be really good fun.
Yeah, they should be good fun. People find out what we do. £1,000 to charity. Everyone's a winner. So yeah, looking forward to that. Also, looking forward to meetups, which are upon us again. Next week is the first Thursday of the month, which can only mean that it is Meetup Day. I am especially excited about this one because I get to go and kick off a brand new meetup. We are launching a meetup in Waterloo. We've had a meetup in the south of London before, but we're shifting to a brand new location, and I'm going to be down there, getting that off, hopefully, to a good start. So if you're in striking distance of Waterloo, maybe you work around there or it's on your way back home, do pop in and say hello to us. There should be a really good crowd down there.
Of course, you can get your tickets and find out more at thepropertyhub.net/meetup. But for those who are super keen, it's at the All Bar One. So it's the All Bar One at Waterloo. Should be a very good event. I know Matt and Joe, the meetup leaders there, are going to do a great job. It's a lovely venue, so I think you're going to have a good time, Rob. And, funnily enough, you didn't have to travel far for this meetup, so well done for arranging that. I think I'm gonna actually go outside the M25 this month, but I'll announce in the newsletter where that'll be.
Not committing to it on air yet, I see. We will see how you get on.
I will, I promise.
Okay, so lots of meetups for you to choose from. Wherever you are, there should be one near you. Let's move on to the news story this week before we hear from our interloper, Pete Matthew. The news story this week, Rob, the Northern Powerhouse that we've talked about several times in the past. We had a really great magazine feature about it. Well, thankfully for us, still a thing.
It is. The Northern Powerhouse is going ahead, never in doubt. But if you had followed the news recently, Theresa May was not against it, but she was quiet. And then George Osborne started pushing her into a corner, you could say, a political corner. He is now heading a new think tank, which promotes the Northern Powerhouse, which can only be a good thing. And Theresa May, in the last week, has come out confirming her commitment to the Northern Powerhouse. Manchester gets mentioned in particular. Very, very good news. It's good to hear that being mentioned and talked about prior to the autumn statement, which is not too far away now, which we should see some major projects announced, because the leaks from the media that are coming out is certainly hinting at that. So all very exciting stuff. So if you want to read up on that a little bit more, check out the show notes, which this week you can find at thepropertyhub.net/personal Pete. And talking of Pete, we better get him on. So why is Pete Matthew on the show? We rarely do interviews. Well, for a few reasons. Yes, he's a great guy, but actually it's because he knows what he's talking about. When we've got subjects that we're not experts on, yes, we could talk about personal finance and give our own views, but if you've got somebody in your network that really, really knows the stuff, why not bring them on? So we've been on Pete Matthew's Meaningful Money podcast, absolutely fantastic, twice. So, of course, we thought, we keep going around to his house, so we better get him around for tea. So we got him onto the podcast and we weren't disappointed.
Certainly not. There's a load of really, really great stuff in this episode, including some really important bits that somehow we've completely neglected to talk about for 3.5 years. And when Pete said it, it's like, oh yeah, how have we not mentioned this before? So that's the value of getting a true expert in. We kicked off by saying to Pete, well, you speak to loads and loads of people about their personal finances. What's the biggest mistake you see them making?
Oh, gosh, so many. Difficult to choose one. I think probably the biggest mistake, and perhaps the mistake with the biggest impact, is where people are attempting to time the market, whatever market they're in. So, whatever it is that they're investing in, trying to time it is usually a really bad idea, certainly for the ordinary investor on the street. So, if I got somebody who wants to put some money in the market and they see some stock market wobbles and they think, okay, I think I'll just hang on to my money a little bit and I'll put it in when things settle down. That rarely works. Or, sometimes they might say, well, I'm just going to, I foresee some problems around the US election, so I'm going to pull my money out into cash and then decide when to go back in. That stuff never works. And there is faultless evidence about that it is far better to stay in for the long term and invest through thick and thin, really. And, that's the better long-term plan. So there's a huge difference between investment returns and investor returns. And the difference is usually people's behavior. So always best to hang in there for the long term.
What should be people doing? What should they start off by setting themselves up before they, get stuck in and plowing their money into left, right and centre? Before they get anywhere near that point, what's the first step?
Lots of steps. I think you should always start with some kind of plan. How detailed that is, is different for every person. But investing, that's building for the future, right? And it's tempting to sort of rush on ahead and think, great, I can get rich, whether it be through property investing or dumping money into a pension or whatever. It can be tempting to sort of pile ahead and think, this is going to be great. This is my sort of way to becoming a wealthy person. But if you start building wealth with a flawed foundation, it can all come crashing down, right? Now, I'm a fairly cautious person. I deal with a lot of people with a lot of money, and I've got to face them over their kitchen table if it all goes belly up, right? So I'm always keen to put in these strong foundations before people invest on top of that. Now, when it comes particularly to property investing, given that we're here and we're talking about this stuff, I wouldn't even get involved with investing of any kind unless I'd paid down all my bad debt first. So bad debt is credit and store cards, personal loans, overdrafts, stuff like that. If we're in the realms of payday loans, then we're really not talking to people who are investing, right? But this is what I would call bad debt. High interest, used to buy stuff which depreciates in value. That's as opposed to good debt, which is things like mortgages. Used to buy assets which usually appreciate in value. Student loans would be a good debt because it sort of helps give you a step up on the salary ladder and stuff like that. So I would make sure bad debt is paid down first. I don't really see there's a lot of point in you trying to get some returns while still paying a chunk of interest to other people. That doesn't make any sense. You're making other people rich, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And that good debt, bad debt distinction gets missed by a lot of people. I think people are either quite comfortable with debt or they just have this kind of blanket, all debt is bad kind of view. And book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which we've talked about multiple times, makes that clear. And that's sort of the light bulb moment for a lot of people in our audience, I think. And as part of that foundation that you're building, something that we've never really talked about on the podcast before, but I know that you sometimes recommend, is life insurance. So where should that fit into people's plans?
Yeah, it's like the most boring product ever, isn't it? Life insurance. You're doing something to cover something that you hope will never happen. All insurance is, you hope you never need it, but when you do, then it's fantastic to have it in place. And again, every person's situation is different. So if you've got a single person with no dependents, then maybe they don't need some life insurance, which is, simply a policy that pays out if you die within a set term, and you pay a premium for it every month usually. So it depends on your dependents, is what I sort of thought when I was thinking about this. So if you've got people who are dependent on you, I think it ought to be law that there should be some form of protection for those left behind. If nothing else, it makes it a little bit easier. So, if you had a property portfolio, let's say you live in your own house and, you've got a mortgage on that, and maybe you've got a couple of other properties as well with buy-to-let mortgages on. Even if you have nobody dependent on you and you think, well, the mortgages, they'll just get paid off by selling the properties. That's fine. But a little bit of life insurance, maybe, 30, 50 grand, something like that, held in trust for those who will be sorting out the mess left when you die can make life an awful lot easier. And it might cost you, depending on how old you are, 10, 20, 30 quid a month. It's sort of no-brainer money, really. You can allow a lump of money is released quickly, usually within 2 or 3 weeks. If it's held in trust, it's not part of your estate that way, so it doesn't have to go through the whole probate process. And it just, look, here is a chunk of money to help you sort out all my mess when I'm gone, really. And it doesn't have to cost the earth. So it almost ought to be, part of the course, I think. If you've got dependents, then there's a lot more to it than that. I mean, I, without any question, would have my home mortgage covered in the event of death. There are other things you can cover as well. Critical illness, so those are things like cancer, heart attack, stroke, but also, not just old person diseases, so things like multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, all those things. You can have a lump of money paid out if one of those things happens to you as well. And even income protection, less the case perhaps for buy-to-let investors or professional property investors, where the income is likely to come in, whether they're actually physically able to work or not. But again, every case is different. But some kind of protection program doesn't have to cost the earth. And it, again, forms part of this foundation on which you build wealth for the future.
It is cheap. I can't believe we actually haven't talked about it on a podcast before, but I have it in place. It's so simple to do as well. Another one linked to this, Pete, is people, surprisingly, so many people don't have wills in place, which again, I know it's not completely directly linked to life insurance, but obviously we're talking about the same subject. Things can get messy if you don't have that in place as well.
Oh, super messy, yeah. And it's, again, I don't know what the stat is. It's something like 1 in 30 or 1 in 20 or something. I probably shouldn't guess, but it's a very small proportion of us have wills in place. It does make things massively easier for those left behind. If you don't have a will, then everything you have is subject to the laws of intestacy. So in other words, it's the realm and the government which decides who gets what. And for the sake of probably, depends where you are in the country, but down here in Cornwall, you can get a will written for 100 quid. Probably in London, it's 500. But either way, just give me a ring, folks. I'll put you in front of somebody local who can work via Skype. But it's one of those things that you put off. But once it's done, it actually provides a great deal of peace of mind.
All right. So we've talked about all the things that don't get talked about enough. And so we've done our duty there. It's a bit depressing though. So can we get on to the good stuff now? Let's start talking let's talk about building up some savings and putting those savings to use in some kind of way. So if people want to invest in property, it starts by building a deposit. The days of 100% mortgages, thankfully, are behind us. If someone's in that sort of painfully slow stage of building that deposit, where should they keep their cash? Can they invest it somewhere other than the bank, getting a derisory rate of interest to get there faster?
Yeah, if I had a quid for every time I get asked this question, Rob, what can I do with the money I've got in the bank now? I'm getting 0.4% on it or something if I'm lucky. Yeah, it can be tempting to invest for the short term. Now, when I use the word invest, I don't use it in the context of like cash ISAs or perhaps special bonds that you get, fixed term bonds in the bank. Those are not investments. One of my mantras on Meaningful Money is cash is not an investment. So cash, money in the bank, that's somewhere where you hold money for the short term. Nobody saves in a bank to get rich. It just doesn't work that way because the rates are just not there. So it can be tempting, therefore, to try and get a better rate and invest, but for the short term. The problem is when you are investing in the true sense of the word, so in my world, that's stock market investments, there is a lot of short-term volatility. We've experienced it a lot in the last 18 months. The FTSE 100, for example, has added, if I just do my very quick mental arithmetic, something like 15, 17% since February, but it dropped more than that between last April for 2015 and February 2016. So that's a big swing in your money if you're invested in the FTSE 100, to lose 20% of it, then get a chunk of it back. And so while it's tempting to try and get better returns for the very short term, true investing is done over the long term, 5, 7, 10 years. So the best advice always is find the best rate you can, obviously. Use a cash ISA, so at least you're not paying any tax on the interest. It all depends on your situation. But, try and keep that money on deposit. Yes, the rates are derisory. That means you're going to have to save more, probably, which is good discipline anyway. But unless you can get your deposit from somebody else, family, mine a lottery win or something. The only way to do it is to build it month on month. But how good does it feel when you've built that and you can say, look, I did this and now I'm going to put it to good use for a deposit on a property?
Definitely. And everyone, of course, is going to be watching that accumulate until it gets to the level that they need so they can put down that deposit. But of course, you don't want to be putting every last penny into that deposit and leaving nothing in the bank, because then what do you do if you lose your job or something goes wrong with a property or something like that? You need some kind of rainy day fund. But how do you calculate how much cash you should have on hand for emergencies and things like that?
Yeah, how long is a piece of string, right? There's some rules of thumb. So I think a good rule of thumb, if you're in a secure job, so you're very unlikely to be made redundant in the short term, I know nobody can foresee that, then probably 3 months worth of net income is a great place to be. If you're self-employed, or if you're maybe working for a very small company, and that's always a riskier operation, then maybe keep more than that, 3 to 6 months. I don't know many people who have 6 months income in an emergency fund, but most people maybe can get hold of money if they absolutely need it. Try not to use a credit card sort of limit as a short-term emergency fund. That's not a great idea, really. Far better for you to have the money yourself and essentially lend it to yourself if there's an emergency. Some people can maybe draw from family if it absolutely came to it. But try to be self-sufficient. Try to have some money for yourself just in case you need it. Because life throws things at us, doesn't it?
It does. It does. That's what makes it interesting. Okay, so we've got to the point where we've got ourselves a bit of deposit. We've been disciplined. We put the money away. We've cleared our debt down. We've got our life insurance, so we're good to get going. What should we be doing next?
Back to what we started at the beginning, really, having some kind of a plan. We can sort of fall into these things, and a lot of us do. We get all excited and we sort of look at the first deal that comes across our desk and we think, right, that's the one, and I'm going to go for it. Best to sort of take a step back and have a plan, I think. So I think you need to perhaps set some limits or set some almost practical ways that you will deal with debt. It's always important to be careful with debt, even good debt, right? Because even good debt can become bad if it gets out of control. So even good debt to buy an appreciating asset like a property, generally appreciates, of course, not always, but usually, we need to be careful with it. So not to scale too quickly, particularly if you're a new property investor, to find your feet, get used to how it all works. Certainly shop around for the right mortgage, but I don't know what you guys think. For me, I always tell people, find a really good mortgage broker who can help. I'm not a mortgage broker, okay? So when I came to do my mortgage, I thought I'd be able to do a decent job. Got hold of my bank, had a dreadful experience with them, and then eventually admitted defeat and spoke to a broker here in town who sorted me a mortgage out in about 15 minutes. Dealing with a good professional can save you an awful lot of time and headache. So shopping around for a right mortgage, using a decent professional, it's worth paying fees if you're getting good value, even with all the information that's out on the internet, I think you definitely need to plan for blank periods. So if you're buying buy-to-lets, it's wonderful when that rental income starts coming in and you start to see some profit on the whole exercise. But, blank periods can be a problem if you don't have that emergency fund. So I would build a buffer fund between you and a blank period. So by stockpiling some rent, maybe that emergency fund that we talked about just now, have some kind of fund that you can draw from, because that mortgage has got to be paid no matter what. So if you don't have a tenant for 3 months, you've got 3 months worth of mortgage payments to make and all the rest of the bills as well. So plan for blank periods. And I think a general rule, again, this makes me sound dreadfully pessimistic, is if you can plan for the worst case, plan for, I don't know what a worst case would be in the current market, a 6-month blank period. If you plan for that, then chances are you'll never need to draw on that. You'll probably be pleasantly surprised. You'll be fully rented out for a long period of time. Plan for the worst case. Be conservative in your planning. And then, I think you'll probably be pleasantly surprised and things will work well for you.
That's great to hear, Pete, because it echoes a lot of what we talk about. And absolutely on the mortgage broker point, we both use mortgage brokers. You think, the property podcast, these guys could do it themselves. Arguably, we could, but that's their field. That's what their expertise. And while you can know a lot a little about a lot of subjects in property investment, why not just use professional? They make it quicker, they make it easier. They'll save you time through saying, oh, well, that headline rate looks attractive, but actually, once you get to this point, they're going to say no, and then you've spent all that money. That's what they can foresee. That's not what the headlines tell you. So absolutely agree. And definitely on the plan for the worst case, being conservative with your expectations, I completely agree, is only going to leave you pleasantly surprised and happy, which is what we want.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we are good examples of this, or bad examples of this, depending on how you look at it. But people who are interested in property, once they've got their first one and they're into it, they are really into property and get very excited about it. And it can be easy to think that property is the only asset class, but of course it's not. So how do you put property investing into context and consider it alongside other potential investments you could make? What kind of things should people be thinking about?
Yeah, it pleases me to bring some balance here, boys, all right? People get just as excited about investing in shares, would you believe? I know that sounds ridiculous, but they do. I'm an absolute believer in holistic financial planning. It can sound like a bit of a buzzword, that, but what it essentially means is looking at your entire finances in the round. I love property as an asset class. It's absolutely unique. It offers things that other asset classes clearly don't. Alongside that come different risks, of course, which you guys have covered in superb detail over the years. But I think eggs in baskets still applies. Okay, if you've got all your eggs in the property basket, there is an element that you are sort of exposed to that asset class. So while property is superb, I think it makes sense to perhaps use some of the money you make out of property and diversify. So I would look perhaps to take some profit at some point, and rather than just piling it into another property, maybe think, okay, maybe I can put some of that money into a pension. It's extremely tax efficient to do that. You can even kind of invest in property in a pension, but we'll perhaps come to that another time. But by spreading the money around, you're immediately reducing your risk on that by being exposed to that one asset class. You can broaden your approach to wealth creation that way. Property is not just a one-way street, neither is the stock market. You always hear bad things about the stock market, but the sort of 150 million quid that I look after for my clients is proof that we're building wealth for our clients through intelligent investing. So there's ways to build wealth outside of property. I think property should be a part of the vast majority of people's wealth creation plan, but it isn't the be-all and end-all. So consider alternatives, use the money you make from property, and perhaps look to broaden your approach, thereby reducing your risk.
Huge thank you to Pete for joining us on the show. I'm sure you'll agree he offered lots of value, and as Rob mentioned before we got going, talked about things that we've neglected in the past as well, which was really, really important. Now, if you want to get your hands on a bit more of Pete's stuff, and maybe this is the first time you've heard of Pete, check out the Meaningful Money podcast and the Meaningful Money website. You will be not disappointed. Very much like ourselves, he just gives away all the knowledge for free. So we'd really encourage you to go and check out his stuff. And I'd really encourage you to stick around for our resource of the week and to hear about what's coming up next week. But before we do, let's give our thanks to a wonderful individual. And this week, I'd held this one back for a couple of weeks as a new Pete was coming on. And this review comes from Monsoon Gold. I found a property podcast from the Meaningful Money podcast. The colourful characters of both Robs make the detailed, concise information provided on this podcast easy to absorb. Even the average person who has little knowledge of property, like me, I'm referring back to some of your earlier podcasts to get a better idea on the capital necessary to start investing in property. Many thanks to you both, and congratulations on a great podcast channel. Well, a huge thank you to Monsoon Gold. That's a great review. Really do appreciate it, and appreciate anybody who wanders over from the Meaningful Money podcast over to ourselves.
Yes, if you have found us by that or any other channel, do come and say hello in the form of a review. You'll get read out on the show, and it makes us very, very happy. Okay, so nearly time to wrap up. But before we do, we could not leave you without a resource of the week. And this week's resource comes from Matt Chan. So thank you, Matt, who emailed in with this one. Now, we are both big fans of using music or using sound to kind of train ourselves into productivity. Rob's talked about the trick of listening to a song on repeat in the past. We've also talked about Focus at Will. I've talked about Brain FM, and we've got another one. In case none of those have worked for you, Matt recommends Moobert.com. The link will be in the show notes, and it's another of these services where you can say what it is that you want to do and the kind of sound that you want, and then it'll put something together for you that's designed to help you concentrate. I would say if you're starting to delve into your personal finances and trying to, do a bit of an audit of where you're up to, maybe start reading some life insurance policies, you're definitely going to need a bit of help with your concentration. So maybe this is something you'll want to look into. The link to that, along with everything else, will be in the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/personalpete.
So, Rob, next week, are you ready to go on holiday? No, don't worry, people. We are not going to disappear. We're going to do something a little bit different.
Yes, we are. We have always focused on UK property investment. We're not going to suddenly start trying to flog you off-plan stuff in Bulgaria or anything else, but we are going to recognise that the rest of the world exists. We're going to be talking about property investment around the world. We're going to be talking about what investment looks like in different countries and some general principles to keep in mind. So if that's something you want to do, or if just looking at Rightmove and procrastinating on there isn't doing it for you, and you want to broaden your procrastination search and start looking at places with sea views and all the rest of it, this is going to be the episode that will cook you in that direction.
We did want to record it from each country, but unfortunately the budget wouldn't stretch that far. So we will be remaining pale and pasty. But never mind, because we'll be cheering ourselves up by attending a meetup. Remember, the meetups are happening very soon. First Thursday of every single month. The Property Hub meetups occur. Make sure you get along to one. Waterloo launches this month, but there are others in London and others all over the country and around the world. So get along to one, especially if you've not been before. Check it out. Very relaxed. You will not be disappointed.
You absolutely will not. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you to Pete. Do go check out the show notes at Personal Pete, where you'll find a link to Meaningful Money and the news and the resource and everything else. We will be back next Thursday, and before that, Tuesday, with Ask Rob and Rob. So until then, have fun. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.